All week long, I've had the same phrase playing in my head. It started on Monday when I read today's readings. It's been playing around in my head all week. It's from the second reading, right in the middle of the second reading, from St. Paul's letter to the Philippians. The peace of God that surpasses all understanding. The peace of God that surpasses all understanding. The Christian community at Philippi in Macedonia, in what is now northeastern Greece, was the very first church that Paul established in Europe. And he seemed to have a very close and very happy relationship with the community. The city itself had been historically very important. Philip II was from there, and he named the city after himself. He was the father of Alexander the Great. It was also just outside Philippi, for those of you history buffs, that Antony and Octavian defeated the forces of Brutus and Cassius, they who killed Julius Caesar. So Philippi had played its role, its fair share in history. But it was also home to a small community of Jews, to whom Paul preached, and from whom he faced a lot of opposition. And so one of the main themes in this letter is persistence. Persistence in face of opposition and even in the threat of death. Paul offers himself as an example of steadfast courage and joy in the midst of harsh circumstances and possible death. It's something Paul understood very, very deeply, and it was something he was trying to share with the community. We know that Paul was in prison somewhere, awaiting trial when he wrote this letter. We're not sure where. Most scholars seem to think that it was written during Paul's imprisonment in Rome, which would have been sometime between 59 and 63 AD. But we are not sure. Some say it was written earlier, when he was imprisoned in Ephesus, or maybe even in Caesarea, when he was in prison. Paul was in prison a lot. But we just don't know. But we do know that he was in prison, and that the outlook was bleak. And yet what comes through in this letter is not fear. Someone might expect that from someone writing from prison and facing death. What comes across is his apostolic love and concern for the gospel and for his converts. Paul, in this letter, more than any other, reveals his human sensitivity and tenderness, his enthusiasm for Christ as the key to life and death, and his deep feeling for the members of the community. Paul shares his hopes and convictions, his anxieties, his fears, revealing the total confidence in Christ Jesus that for him constitutes faith. Some have called this the letter of joy because Paul rejoices in his faith based on his understanding of Jesus' unique role in the salvation of all who profess him as the Christ. And I think all of this is captured very well by the one line that's been in my head all week. Today's reading starts off, have no anxiety at all. He's in prison. Have no anxiety at all. But in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God. And then he says, and when you do that, the peace that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. The peace that surpasses all understanding. It's something Paul knew. It's something that changed his life. It changed him from a zealous Pharisee. I'm not criticizing him. He was a very good Jew, very faithful to the law, but he had been persecuting the followers of this rabbi, this Jesus, until he had his own personal encounter with the risen Jesus on the road to Damascus. And that encounter changed him forever. It changed him from a zealous Pharisee to a zealous Christian, to someone whose mission was to bring the good news to Jesus Christ to as many people as he encountered. Paul never did anything halfway. Something happened to Paul, and that something filled him with peace. The peace of God that surpasses all understanding. I've been trying to figure out all week what Paul meant, And then I realize there's a bit of irony here, because I've been trying to understand and explain something that by definition surpasses all understanding. So I'm not going to do that. But it's just like faith. It's not something that can be explained. It's not something that can be proven. It's not something that can be forced on you. It is something that you experience. It is a deep relationship that you have with Jesus Christ. And when you experience it, when you know that, then it does not need to be explained to you. Because you know it, and it surpasses all understanding. But Paul gives us clues. Paul gives us things that he asks us to think about. He tells us to pay attention. Pay attention. Pay attention to whatever is true. Pay attention to whatever is honorable. To whatever is just. Pay attention to whatever is pure. To whatever is lovely. Pay attention to whatever is gracious. If there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, pay attention to it. That's what we are to think about. Because they give us a clue into the movement of the good Spirit. The Spirit of God that leads us to peace and joy and contentment. So keep on doing what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, he says. Then the Spirit of God will be with you. Paul was not humble either. But only a person filled with God's Spirit, only a person who is reassured by the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, can make so bold, so daring, so foolhardy the claim. And to do it sincerely, not arrogantly or boastfully or conceitedly, but Paul does this in all genuineness and candor. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. That's a good guide as any I've ever encountered in my life. It's what leads to a deeper, more profound, more authentic experience and understanding of God. It's something that can only be claimed by someone who has experienced it firsthand, even if he's in prison, even if he has opposition, even if he is facing death. Because the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, sustained Paul until the very end. The end did come. Paul did die, though we're not sure how. We do know he was martyred sometime after the Great Fire in Rome, possibly between 64 and 68 AD, sometime during the reign of Nero. He was one of those workers who did the landowner's bidding and made sure that the stone that was rejected actually did become the cornerstone by unceasingly preaching and sharing the good news. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Then the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus.